Good evening, everybody. Welcome to our Thursday New York Giants Preservation Society meeting for February 2nd. Tonight we have a return guest, Lew Freedman. Lew had originally spoke about Johnny Mize. Tonight he is going to be speaking about Juan Marichal, his journey from the Dominican Republic to Cooperstown. Not necessarily a New York Giant thing, but most of you guys in here, you know, he was one of the early SF Giants who I think unquestionably is the greatest San Francisco Giant pitcher. I don't know if anybody would argue with that, but we'll turn it over to Lew in just a few minutes. Just some other news. I told you that we're going to be starting a YouTube channel, and I hope that we get that started the week of Valentine's week. My daughter is going to set us up with that. I was able to somehow find two more recordings, Phil Mushnick and Corey Bush. Tonight's is number 99. We're going to have over 90. There's 4 more possibilities. My daughter is going to come over here and do some kind of OneDrive and something else, SharePoint. But I honestly think that I've exhausted this computer. I don't think they're here. But I spoke to Rob Garrett, and Rob suggested that a few of them, even the ones we had on Google Meets, they were interviewed by like Cooperstown and other places. They'd be similar to ours. I don't think it's good because you guys make it what it is. And I will write a little notation and include those in our YouTube channel. I'll just say, you know, Dan Taylor spoke about his book on the Hollywood stars. Here is a similar video. And this way, you know, we claim that that's kind of ours, even though it's not ours. But Dan should get the credit for that. It's just unfortunate that I don't know where that went. Also, while we got the YouTube channel, I decided also that we need to have a full archive. So I was able to research everything we got, and I now have them all archived. Our live events that we took place when we started at Bergino's and Affinities, just the dates and what they were, so you guys can see that. And I also found any podcasts that any of us were involved in where the Giants are, our organization is mainly the topic, and also any newspaper articles. So I think that week of Valentine's Day, I will be sending out stuff. If you ever want to watch this stuff, podcast, listen to the podcast, or read the articles, and then the YouTube channel will be up. But we are in very good stead with that. Next week, I explained before, my math abilities left me for a couple of weeks. Maury Bouchard, who's here, will be our 100th Zoom. We'll be talking about Herman Franks. So that should be an exciting night. And we have Dan Levitz here. Dan was recently won an award from Sabre, the best book of the year. And Dan spoke twice about that, the Balk book and things like that. So Dan, congratulations.
Thank you.
And we have Karen Marco will be here in March. Here's a brand new book on Eddie Grant that you might want to pick up, and we will go from there. But for now, it is my pleasure again to introduce Lew Freedman, and Lew is going to talk about Juan Marichal, and Lew is also just sent in a book on Hoyt Wilhelm. Hopefully, maybe by the end of the year, Lew will come back if the book is published and speak about Hoyt Wilhelm, who is near and dear to New York Giant fans. Without any further ado, Lew, welcome back. Give it up for Lew Freedman.
Thanks for having me, guys. Enjoyed last time, and I'm looking forward to talking today. Juan Marichal when I was a kid, Juan was in his prime, so he was a rookie in 1960, and he was just one of my favorite pitchers, even though I hardly ever saw him except on the occasional game of the week in the World Series or All Stars, because I grew up in an American League city following the Boston Red Sox. But Juan Marichal always stuck in my mind, one of my favorite pitchers from my youth, and he was terrific. Juan is about 85 years old right now. Um, Last I saw him, which is amazing to me how much time has come out since the book first was published, which was 2011. And how did we all get so old? Um, and how quickly? But boy, just every time you look at his record, he did so many great things for the Giants. He won 25 games twice and 26 games once. I don't know if anybody's going to do that anymore. Just it's one of those things where we get the evolution of the game where the starting pitcher is not going to stick around with complete games, or in the case of one of Juan's most famous games, which was also head to head with Warren Spahn for 16 innings. Both of those guys pitched the whole game, 1-0 game. What an incredible game to think of these days. They were not so involved with pitch counts in those days, although I think the pitch counts were like 200 or so a piece or more. And many times during the course of the close game, the manager of each team would go out there, or either in the dugout or go out to the mound and go up to Juan Marichal and he'd say, "Have you had enough? Have you thrown enough? Do you want to come out?" And Juan was probably 25 at the time. And he said, "No, I'm not coming out of this game unless that old timer goes out before me." And then they would say in the other dugout, they would say the same thing to Warren Spahn. And he would say, "I'm not leaving that game as long as that young whippersnapper is still pitching." So they were dueling by proxy in words as well as in pitches. Somebody did write a whole book about just that game, I believe, which is just one of those remarkable games that we come across in history sometimes. To actually go and do the book with Juan, I had a terrific time. Sometimes, I've been doing this kind of stuff, journalism, newspapers, books for quite a while. And this was probably one of the most fun times because I had never been to the Dominican Republic. I didn't know if I would ever get there. As a byproduct, I'd always wanted to see a winter league game somewhere, but didn't know how I would ever make it happen. And as a byproduct of hanging out with Juan in the Dominican, I was able to do that too. But I was, unlike most places you travel, which considering most times is in the United States, I had no idea where to stay or, any recognition of what's a good hotel that makes sense when you go into, Santiago. And I did have a cousin who's a travel agent. She recommended a place, and that's how I ended up at whatever it was, the Hilton Dominican or something. But so fly into the country, and Juan told me not to rent a car. He would have a driver pick me up and take him to his house for we do our interviews in what I later came to call his man cave, even though I don't know that he ever used those words. It was a downstairs room in his home, which was decorated with all baseball memorabilia. But I get off the plane, I get in a taxi cab to my hotel, and I discover that the road leading from the airport is called Sammy Sosa Boulevard. So you think right away you're in a place that appreciates baseball. And this is probably like 2010-ish, I guess, probably the year before the book came out or so, roughly about that time. So that was kind of like, oh, that's kind of cool. Maybe I'll run into Sammy, right, while I'm here. And then the next morning, so I check into my hotel and have the evening, free. I didn't even go out. I think I ate dinner in the hotel. Get up the next morning and waiting in the lobby for the Juan Marichal limo mobile to pick me up. And who comes down the elevator and walks up to the front desk to check out? It's Albert Pujols. So I guess you can't escape baseball at all. So I mean, here's Albert at the front desk checking out of the hotel. He's I didn't have a chance to go up to him because he was mobbed by all the employees, the bellmen and everybody working there at the hotel surrounding him and asking for his autograph. I will say that somewhat humorously in that era, I was writing about the Cincinnati Reds, and later that season, he was still with the Cardinals before he'd gone to the Angels, and he came to town in Cincinnati at a game I was at, and I waited till and a lot, of course, he played a big role in the game, as he often did, and all the reporters were surrounding him afterwards. And he was just being very formulaic in his answers. Yeah, he hit a curveball. It was a good play. It was nice that we won. I waited till everybody left and he got out of the shower, and I came up to him and I said, hello, and said, last summer, I saw you in this hotel in the Dominican, and his whole demeanor changed. It was like he lit up. He said, you've been to my country. What did you think of it? He kept pumping me for my thoughts about how much I liked the Dominican. And then, of course, I told him I was there to hang out with Juan Marichal. So that elevated my status too, because Juan was such a national hero, even for a guy like Albert Pujols, who had grown up and admiring him and, knowing, what he meant to baseball. And that's kind of was my impression um, about baseball in Dominican and with Juan, that whenever we went out, basically we did all of our tape recording interviews in the basement at his home. So it was quiet and we were surrounded by baseball photos and the balls he had saved from his career. But when we went out in public, it was like we were in danger of being mobbed, because it didn't take long as we're walking down the street for people to start recognizing him and coming up to him, and he asking for autographs, wanted to pose for selfies with him. So Juan was like this massive celebrity, as we would expect, and I was sort of like just a hanger on there, kind of walking with him down the street. One thing he was good at, I noticed, which I guess most celebrities are, is being a tap dancer to get himself away from a crowd, while at the same time not getting people mad at him for, just keep on moving to his destination. And him signing autographs as he went. So that was kind of funny to watch how he handled that. And we did go to a winter league game with one of the local teams, and that team actually was being managed by, speaking of Giants connections, at least, Moises Alou, the son of Felipe, was the manager. And our seat was very close to the dugout. So Moises saw Juan come in right away and leaned over the fencing, and they talked over the fence and chatted about all kinds of things. And once people in the stands realized Juan Marichal was in the house, they started to slip down the stairs, trying to slide over in the aisles and approach him for autographs. And so they had to start putting security around us. We were with his son, one of his sons as well. There were three of us. But they actually had to form a perimeter so that he could actually watch the game, uninterrupted, because we were just sitting in the stands. He wasn't in the press box or in any way removed. So we had security. And then his cell phone rang, and it turned out it was ESPN Deportes, wanting to know if they could put him on the air for some commentary during the game. And so then they sent down some headphones, and he was on the air for a little bit. And he says, well, I guess they saw me already on TV screen. I said, yeah, what they're really wondering is who's that strange anonymous white guy sitting next to you who that nobody knows. But so then he did TV commentary at the game for fun. So being out with one, then we went out for a late dinner. We went to a restaurant that was virtually empty, which in retrospect, I'm sure was part of his strategy, was to wait and eat late. And there was only one table of about 6 guys there. But of course, they knew who Juan was when we came in, and they waved him over, and he had to speak to their table and things. So it was fun to actually just see the public reaction to this longtime Dominican dandy hero in the game, and knowing how important baseball is in the Dominican. And he repeated that phrase to me during the course of our interviews and our chats. That you know it was the thing, the number one thing in the country, is the way I think he put it. Baseball was the most important thing. Um, Maybe that was true in the United States before we were all born. I don't know how far back you have to go. We were chatting a few minutes ago about there was an era in American sports in the 30s to 40s to 50s where the baseball was the national pastime and the most important sport. But then came boxing and horse racing. And pro football was a latecomer. The NFL founded in 1920. The NBA not founded till after World War II. The National Hockey League started around 1920, but there were only 6 teams. And of course, until 1967, when they doubled with expansion. So, I mean, the sporting landscape, never mind the so-called minor sports, nobody cared about soccer at the time or other things. The Olympic sports were the Olympic sports every 4 years. So baseball was truly king. And I think that's the way baseball is in the Dominican. And that's why people in the Dominican, the players who make it big, become big heroes at home. And, many of them also help out with the economy there. They help families, they give them money. And Juan doesn't travel a whole lot these days. He does tend to go to the annual event at Cooperstown for the induction. I actually don't know whether he came or not this year. I was not there, but so the actual joy of doing the book, as well as talking to a man who we would all describe as a gentleman, if we spend any time with him, that kind of demeanor, just added to the pleasure of listening to the baseball stories, the story of his life, his successes. He was, as great as he was, in the early 60s, he was a bit overshadowed by Sandy Koufax right at those same moments, and even Spahn at the end of his career. Warren Spahn pitched 2 no-hitters between the ages of, I think, 39 and 42. So, and was breaking the records for the winningest left-handed pitcher. So, to say you were the best during his prime was a challenge. But he was certainly right there with the best. And he remains, I think, that kind of figure. They're not kidding when they say you're a Hall of Famer for life. I think that's something that Scott Rowland's probably getting used to this week, who is very much a figure in the area where I live in Indiana right now. The Indiana, in fact, I have a column on him in today's newspaper for Seymour, Indiana. And there is a museum called the Indiana Baseball Hall of Fame that singles out 2 or 3 players that have their own special full-blown exhibits with like a statue of them. And Scott Rowland happens to be one of them. So they don't have to do much to honor him anymore now that he was selected for the Hall of Fame a week ago. And one thing I was able to get on the reporter telephone call for Rowland, and was interesting to note that he did not follow baseball so much as a fan the way we do, and the way we collected baseball cards, not knowing all your personal background. But of course, I mean, followed the game intensely from the time I was 9 or 10 years old, collected baseball cards, all that kind of stuff. Roland said that he was too busy playing the game to have an idol, but he had Don Mattingly's poster in his bedroom. And Mattingly is from Evansville, Indiana, and is another one of those few people in the same Hall of Fame that has the special exhibit with his statue. And the thing that struck me most is he said they still talk on the phone. So I assume Don Mattingly, who many people believe should be in the Hall of Fame, was one of the first people to congratulate him. But totally different environment, but the baseball connection. And I think, some of those guys are like the keeper of the flame who come back to Cooperstown every year. I mean, I have actually seen Juan back in Cooperstown. Um, the um, the note that Lew was just putting up, I believe the name had not been changed yet when I was actually in it. It had a different name. It wasn't named for him until since we were there. Um, because I remember I just looked at the name of the stadium where we attended the game before I got on the call. So, Juan is that revered figure in the Dominican, and it helps that he still lives there and his family's still there. And he has his own story and the sense to inspire young people and is conscious of doing that. He's given equipment to the youth leagues. He's makes himself available to be heard by young players who have aspirations to make the majors. And he came from humble beginnings, and he has the he can inspire them just by saying, this is what I did and I worked hard at it and I succeeded. It's interesting that when you look at his background, one of the things you'll see, unlike so many of the pitchers these days, he's, his statistics, his measurements, so to speak, or listed like on his baseball reference stats, have him at 6 feet tall and 180 pounds. And these days, for a starting pitcher, that's like smaller than the point guards are allowed to be in the NBA. I mean, how many pitchers are 6'3", 6'5", 220 now, throwing heat the way they are? It was actually similar measurements to even Hoyt Wilhelm was bigger, I think. We were talking about Hoyt at the beginning of the show. And when he was breaking in with the Giants, his first year was 1952. And of course, nobody threw slower than Hoyt Wilhelm. So, except maybe Bronson Arroyo, but that's a different topic. Bronson Arroyo must be the guy who threw the slowest in Major League history without throwing a knuckler. But anyway, and I'll be happy to answer any questions about Juan. If anybody wants to ask me anything, I can hopefully look it up. Oh, of course, one thing I did not mention, and the cover of the book represents, it's got him on the mound throwing a pitch in this photograph, and his left foot is above his head. If people remember his style of pitching and his huge leg kick, that was certainly a Juan Marichal trait. Every pitcher is comfortable throwing his own way. And he was one of those guys that practically touched the sky with the sole of his foot when he was throwing to the plate.
Lew, the beauty of our Zoom is that even though the book is over 10 years old, this gives the opportunity for you to talk about it, and we greatly, greatly appreciate it. What is the best way to pick up this book? And while you're explaining that, Bill Klink, can you just hold up that book? Because I know you have it there. I don't have it with me.
Got one next to me, too.
There we go.
That's the one. There's the one and only.
Where's the best place to get that, Lew?
It's a good question, because I believe the company has gone completely out of business.
Okay.
So I think you're talking Amazon.
Okay.
As the best bet. It's, places, these folks, everybody I knew at that company is gone, and I think they're actually went under. I don't even think
Amazon will be the best place. I'll send the link.
I think so.
My first question is, I'm going to hold this up. I don't think you could see it, but this was my first baseball game I ever went to. The date, August 19th, 1969, Shea Stadium. Juan
Mets were
Marichal that day pitched 14 innings. Well, 13 innings. And it was 0-0 against the Mets. And Marichal came out for the 14th inning, and I was 8 years old. And I asked my father, I said, Dad, I got to go to the bathroom. And my father said, your brother will take you. My father wasn't moving. So my brother took me to the bathroom. And at Shea Stadium, there was this roar while we were in the toilet.
Of course.
Brother grabbed my arm, and we saw Tommy Agee circling third base. That was and the Giants lost to the Mets 1-0, but Juan Marichal pitched the whole game. He was an incredible. That was my first introduction to baseball. What an introduction it was. Gary Gentry of the Mets, I think, pitched 9 innings.
Who got the win?
I'm sorry?
Who got the win?
I think Tug McGraw, I think they said.
Oh, my old pal Tug.
Tug McGraw, yes.
There
Tug
you go.
McGraw. Gary Gentry pitched 10 innings. Tug McGraw pitched 4 innings. Marichal 13, and so he got one guy out in the 14th.
13 in the third.
Yes, but that's
I got to know Tug McGraw in Philadelphia.
That was it. That was, like I said, my first game ever, and it was one to remember. All right, we're gonna go with Bill Clink first because he has to run, and then we'll go to Mars and Bill Carone. Bill Clink, you're up. Unmute, Bill.
You know, muting is part of the persona of this organization. So if you don't do it, you're in real trouble with Gary. 38 years ago, you know, what were we all doing? 38 years ago today. Well, 38 years ago today, I saw Juan Marichal in a game. This was one of those games where they fantasy camps. That's what now I was not a camper. I didn't have that kind of money in 1985. I don't have it today. But you know, the thing about these pictures, you know, other than, you know, that it's 38 years ago today, there's something about every one of these pictures of him. And he's smiling.
Smiling, right.
You know, I don't know, Lou, maybe tell me about this. What it is about that. I don't know of any other player who is, at least, I think for real, but certainly on the surface, happier than Juan Marichal. A lot of these guys, it seems like, you know, they're afraid the next check isn't going to cash or something, you know, and, you know, they don't seem very happy. Other than the one episode we won't go over, you know, with Juan, you know, other than that one episode, I think the guy seemed to be the happiest guy on the face of the earth. Tell me why that is.
Well, his house is pretty nice. Yeah, he looks pretty young in those pictures too. He doesn't look like he aged very much when you saw him there. He has whitish hair now. And the other one especially, with his mustache looking dark and all that, he looked really young there still. Yeah, look how young he looks.
Yeah,
that's 38 years ago, not 58.
38 years ago today.
Yeah, see, he looks younger than that. And he looked pretty young when I was with him too. But you know, I think he's got more white hair now. But I suppose I will too if I'm 85 at some point. It's bound to happen. That's if any of it's left. I mean, if it doesn't fall out, but the rest of it. I mean, he had to
be as happy as he is. That's all I can say. Whatever. He had the fountain of youth, but he found the fountain of happiness.
Every guy, you know, is different, of course. You know, I would never say, you know, I'm thinking of guys, the 1980 Phillies, which I was around. I bring that up because we used the cough. We just talked about Tug McGraw, and I just, and I spent some time with him. I was at his home, and he actually gave me a gift of collection of his Scroogey comics that he did for the New York newspapers when he was playing for the Mets. Tug was a wonderful guy who was always in a good mood. It was so sad to hear, how he gets sick and his brain, how can you tell what people are doing? But a guy who I thought was off and on grumpy the whole time was Mike Schmidt. You never knew what you were going to get on any given day. So you're talking about a guy who's always happy no matter what. Can't say enough about Pete Rose's cooperation. Win, lose, or draw, no matter what the circumstances were after a game. Guys like Steve Carlton are hiding in the trainer's room, and Pete Rose is at least as unhappy about losing, and he's there. He'll talk to you. So, obviously everybody's different. And so I think some people come to that naturally. And sometimes they have bitterness imbued in them because of what happens in their life, and other people shrug it off and are grateful for their success. And I think Juan is one of those guys.
That's what's endearing about him, I believe. Just he's happy, he's appreciative of, and not every one of these guys seems to be happy or appreciative of what they got in life. So that's
that's the cross section of life, right?
Right.
Everybody's different. There's 25 guys on a roster, and they all have different personalities. And you would love to think that because they're playing Major League Baseball and have made the dream come true, that they're all happy, but they're not all happy.
Right.
Some are cantankerous, and some are in a good mood all the time.
Yeah.
So I always hope when I'm talking to a guy that he's one of the ones who's in a good mood.
Thank you, Bill. Lou, one other thing before I turn it to Mars. I've been up to Cooperstown quite often in the last 10 years. So, he's 85 now. And so I saw him when he was set. He always looks a debonair, that I will tell you. He's always well dressed, and
absolutely.
He just looks really suave, I guess you would say.
That's a good word, because I think he is. He is a good dresser, and it's like my wardrobe might be Walmart related, so like the same thing I was saying about those people looking down from the stands about who's that, strange or solo white guy over there with one. They might say that sloppy guy too. Because Scott Rowland said the other day during his press conference he hadn't put on a suit in 11 years, and I could identify with that. The only time I wear a tie is weddings and funerals. So, I think I'm down to keeping one tie that's already tied that it can slip over my head on my dresser. And hey, I write about the outdoors. I write about college basketball. I go to Alaska. I used to live in Alaska, Wyoming. How dressy do you have to get?
Thanks, Lou. Mars, you're up.
There's Lorky. He'll tell you how often he gets dressed up in Fairbanks.
Well, Lou, thanks for joining us. Well, you mentioned a couple of relief pitchers, Tug McGraw and Stu Miller. When they asked Tug McGraw, how do you like the artificial grass at the Astrodome? He says, I don't know. I never smoked it.
I thought that was Bill Lee that said it first.
Well,
they might have both
and
said
then
it.
The slowest pitcher I've ever saw was Stu Miller. He had 3 pitches: slow, slower, and slowest. But what I wanted to bring up, as we probably the diehards all realize, that Juan Marichal was the winningest pitcher in the 1960s with 191 victories. Koufax's career was cut short, but he was the winningest pitcher. And so the question I have, do you think the Johnny Roseboro incident, the sports writers held that against him to where he never received a Cy Young? And or do you think that had anything to do with it because of the great seasons Koufax, Drysdale, Bob Gibson had, and then Tom Seaver beat him out in 1969? What's your take on that?
It's a tricky one. I agree that the Roseboro, incident, hitting him in the head with a bat, worked against him I was a teenager. I was a kid. I wasn't anybody who was voting or hanging out with sports writers at that time of my life. Um, but I think he thought it did in terms of the Hall of Fame at first. Um, the Cy Youngs are pretty tricky because we did talk about how the greatness of the pitchers in some of those years. Um, again, you know, you even look at the Hall of Fame votes these days. I don't know where each one of you stands on things, but you got Bonds and Clemens who have come and gone on the 10-year ballot. You got Pete Rose still banned. I don't have a strong feeling on. I don't have a Hall of Fame vote either, but
Jeff Kent should be in.
I mean,
Jeff
Jeff
Kent.
Kent, and I got to tell you, he had a terrible personal reputation as being nasty to people. And that went back, believe it or not. He played in the Alaska Baseball League when I lived there. And I remember being told by another sports writer that the general manager of the team, and that was back when he was 19, 20 years old, Kent. He said that was the only player he ever on his team he wanted to grab by the shirt collar and throw him up against the wall. So he kind of had that personality issue that early. And I mean, I only saw him once or twice in when I was still in Alaska and he was in the majors. And I did approach him once to talk about his time in Alaska, and he blew me off. So that
Well,
was my only
he
time.
was
That's
always
what Kent.
taciturn, and he fought with Bonds in the dugout and in the locker room, and he didn't give the sports writers, from what I hear, the time of day. So that's
I think
probably
the
what's
latter part more than I don't think they were going to hold it against them with the Bonds thing, but
right.
but I do think you might be right about the other, and that it might have been a pattern, and maybe that had something to do with it. He never came close on the ballot, right? Did he go off this year, or does he have 1 year left or something?
He's off.
He's
Yeah, that's
off.
what I thought. But and it was never close, right?
The highest he had was this year, 46%.
Well, there's too much hypocrisy in the Hall of Fame voting. You have Big Papi that took steroids, but he's a happy-go-lucky guy, so he's enamored by the sports writers and by the public. Then you have Alex Rodriguez, that's a phony and a liar. He lied to Katie Couric about steroids on 60 Minutes, if you remember that one. So I hope he never gets in. But there are Helton should get in. He deserves it. Roland deserves it. But if Roland was going to go in, Kent deserves it. Because after all, look at Ted Williams. He didn't give the sports writers the time of day either.
I'll give you one other overlooked third baseman, Ken Moyer. If you look
Yeah,
at Ken
he may not
Moyer's
have had
record,
the offensive numbers, but he was certainly a terrific player.
I mean, I love Ron Santo personally.
Yeah.
If you look at their records side by side, Ken Boyer and Ron Santo in the same time period. Ken Boyer won a world championship. He won an MVP award. I mean, they have the same record. I think he's a guy who's fallen by the wayside. But,
Yeah, I agree. I agree.
And back on the controversial part, just yesterday or today, I don't know, it came out today, but Rod Carew came out and said Pete Rose should go in the Hall of Fame, and baseball should stop being hypocritical. Especially, and I wrote this very column a couple months ago when it was first came out in a press release, that this winter, as we go into next spring season, there will be betting parlors in the Reds Stadium. That's how far betting on baseball has progressed with the stamp of Major League Baseball. So Carew is saying, whatever he did then, and I have used the phrase, you should parole Pete Rose. It's been 30-something years, and he did his time. And look at the environment for betting on baseball. I don't, and it drives me nuts when I see the odds on the screen during the playoffs.
Well, then Joe Jackson should be in, Shoeless Joe.
That could be that's a different issue. No, it's a different. Every case is different. If Roses is betting, and then now betting is in such a accepted American, form of recreation to the point where they're actually putting betting parlors in the baseball stadiums, then you got to look at it.
Well,
And
Rose
besides,
hedged
he
his bet.
served his time. You could say he served his time. I mean,
All right,
pretty
let's
simple
move
Rose
on.
players.
hedged his bets.
Let's move
He-
on.
if
Bill,
he-
Bill Caron, you're up. Bill.
Gary, I just like to say I was at that game also.
Oh, wonderful.
And Marichal's
You're the only two
control-
guys there.
Marichal's control was unbelievable for 14 innings. I think he gave up like 3 walks or something.
I'll tell you exactly what he did.
You happen to have the box score handy.
Yes, I do. 13 strikeouts, 1 walk.
There you go.
Wow.
Yeah, he was fantastic. And he had such control. But anyway, Mr. Freedman, I wanted to ask you, first of all, I want to thank you for your presentation. But also I want to ask you, when you spoke with Juan Marichal, did he ever speak about how the 1965 season was for him? Because if you remember, a couple of weeks after the season started, a civil war broke out in Dominican Republic.
Right.
And President Lyndon Johnson deployed about 2,000 Marines for fear of a second communist government in the Western Hemisphere. And I'm sure Marichal might have had family there. There was a lot of political instability, a lot of economic problems. And I'm wondering how he was able to manage that. And maybe those feelings that he had, I'm wondering if they did impact on how he reacted in the John Roseboro incident, because before then, he never got into a fight with anyone or after that.
Or after, right? He never did.
So I wonder if he ever spoke about that, because that had to be a difficult year for him. And a president wasn't elected until 1966 in the Dominican Republic.
You know, and I even remember that. I don't know whether it was the cover of Time magazine that did it for me or what, but I do know exactly the international political part of that you're referring to.
Right.
What I don't recall is him dwelling on that.
Okay.
Maybe mentioning it in passing, but never dwelling on it. And he actually, in later years, was closely affiliated with the government, and became like minister of sports for the whole country, that kind of
Right.
thing. So
Right. And
playing
the
that
stadium,
kind of
yeah.
role.
And the stadium, Quisqueya Stadium, is now named after him.
Right, and that was
Stadium
what
in
it
the
was
capital
named
city.
when I was there. Was
Yeah.
what it's referring to, which I'm not sure I could have pronounced without your help.
Quisqueya Stadium, yeah, because that's
Yeah.
the island of Quisqueya. Yes.
Right.
Thank you, Bill.
Okay.
Harvey, you're up.
Lou, thanks very much for your presentation. 2 quick comments. I was 14 years old, and for reasons that I won't get into now, my dad brought us up to South Fallsburg, New York, to be with our grandparents that summer. My mother had died the preceding September. And I listened to Juan Marichal's first game for the Giants against the Phillies on my 8-transistor Emerson radio. And I believe I was switching back and forth between, because up there we were able to get Philadelphia on the radio, and I think it was on WCAU. So Gary, I was still a New York Giants fan, and I was a San Francisco Giants fan, and I was 14 years old, and I was listening to Juan Marichal pitch that great game against a 1-hitter against the Phillies.
Les
Now,
Kite was the announcer.
Harvey, we need to talk about South Fallsburg this week, but continue, okay?
We need to talk about South Fallsburg.
Yes, we do.
We'll
Les
have a
Kite
whole
was the-
session
he
on South.
created the game.
All right.
Go ahead, Harvey.
But anyway, the second short comment, I don't want to hog the comments. About 14 months ago, we were still in 2021, I guess. I had to have some suits altered. And I found a great tailor not far from where I live here on Long Island. And the shorthand version is he was from the Dominican. And I got into a conversation with him, of course, and proudly told him that I root for the Los Gigantes de San Francisco. And he then explained to me, he had a wonderful photograph on the wall of himself with one of his sons. And he then proceeded to tell me he had 3 sons, and he named all 3 Juan. Juan,
One,
because
2, and
his-
3.
One,
His,
2,
fa-
3.
his favorite player was Juan Marichal. And of
Yeah.
course I said, I mean, I got into a discussion, and it made the whole situation very pleasant. So that's my comment. But there was this tailor telling me he named his 3 sons Juan after Juan Marichal. 3 sons after Juan Marichal. I assume they had different middle names, but I didn't get into that with him. But so that's how revered Juan Marichal is. And that's proof positive. Thank you very much, Lou. You were terrific.
That's great. That anecdote is super. It reminds me of George
Yeah,
Foreman.
it has the added advantage of being true. I can't make that up.
Even
you know?
better. You're familiar with George Foreman, the heavyweight.
Oh yes, yes,
who
yes.
Named 5 or 6 sons George. He numbered them, I think, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, or whatever it was. So this is reminiscent of that. So it's the only other case I've ever heard of. So he's clearly a Juan fan.
Oh yeah, oh yeah.
Thank you, Harvey. Mr. Alaska, Jim Weber, you're up.
Lou, thanks for the great presentation. I go back in my time with the Giants when they were at Seal Stadium and they first started to play, and had the pleasure of watching Marichal pitch 2 wonderful games, watched them when they built the Candlestick Park and so on, until I found this group. I had no idea anything was wrong with Candlestick Park. I thought it was a great stadium with the snot running out of your nose and it's so foggy you couldn't see anything. It was just terrible. And he pitched one of those foggy games. I don't even know how he could see home plate. But anyway, with all your time in Alaska, between you and John Larkey, how many guys that were turned out to be Giants were in the Alaska Baseball League, which was actually a baseball machine, and I think through John's help probably still is?
Oh, it's still going. Don't know by team.
Yeah, it's
There's
that'd
been
be
over
tough. I know
400. At least
Rich
400.
Aurelia was up here.
Randy Johnson, number 99.
Well, yeah, that's right. He was
Recently.
there at the
No,
end.
he played
Yeah,
Randy Johnson pitched for the Glacier Pilots.
Right. But I
right.
mean, all Alaska Baseball League, it was just seemed like it was every year there was going to be an Alaska representative. And usually it was the Fairbanks Gold Panthers that went back to the National Baseball Congress.
Wichita.
And
the
it was
National
sad if they didn't
Baseball
win.
Congress.
But you knew they were going to be in the finals. I mean, this college baseball was a machine of great players.
Well, this year, who were the 2 MVPs in Major League Baseball? Aaron Judge.
Right.
He played in Anchorage.
He did.
He
Yeah,
did.
Glacier Pilot.
And,
Yeah.
and who was the National League this year? He
Paul
did too.
Goldschmidt.
Goldschmidt. He
Goldschmidt.
played in Alaska too.
Yeah.
So I don't know the last time that's happened, but certainly there's only a handful of players who came through Alaska though who made the Hall of Fame.
Tom Seaver played in
one.
Alaska.
Dave Winfield.
Yeah.
I once was at a big sports card show, like the National, is that what they call it. And I saw Winfield walking about 2 or 3 aisles away, and I was going to try to get his attention. And the way I did it was yelling, "Dave Winfield, Fairbanks Gold Panthers." And his head spun around because who else was going to say something? Who was going to know, right? Because those guys don't, that's like a forgotten part of their career. Or
Definitely
so
how you
long
get
ago.
somebody's attention, for sure.
And I did that.
Absolutely.
That's
Hey,
how I-
Lou, did he talk about the leg kick? Was it something he worked on when he was young so that he could be able to do it as a professional, or was it just natural?
I think it was more natural and all that. And actually, it's funny because we were talking about that game. I mentioned the long one with Warren Spahn. Spahn had the same kind of leg kick with the other leg. So you had the 2 of them
Yeah.
that day, their feet in the air the whole time in the batters' faces. So I remember a
But that
batter
to help with the
talking about,
distraction to the hitter for
Yes,
sure.
exactly. I remember reading some of those quotes where a player would say that about Juan or Warren Spahn. I can't remember which one of it was. Basically, it looked like the foot was going to come down on you. All that. Did you go to the Midnight Sun game this year?
Oh, I manage the goal panners now, so yeah,
You do? Okay.
yeah, yeah. I walked 9 miles that day.
I'll see you at that game
My-
next summer.
Okay, my iWatch was pretty proud of me that night.
All right.
Jeff Henning, you're up.
Hi, thanks. Juan was probably my favorite player growing up as a kid, probably because when I was around 12 or so at Shea Stadium, I got his autograph, and then he looked at my mother and myself and said, "Would you like Willie Mays' autograph?" He took the ball from us, went down into the dugout, and came back about 2 minutes later, and I had both signatures on the same ball. But Juan was part of that purging of the team of their Hall of Famers in the early 70s when they traded away McCovey and Mays and Perry, and Juan went to the Red Sox for that one season, and then, God forbid, pitched those 2 games wearing 57 as a Dodger. My question is, when you were compiling the book, did he ever talk about how that group of future Hall of Famers, which had been the core of the team, felt about what management was doing to the organization at that time?
Really, it was more the focus of the good days, with those guys who were so special, and going through 62, that World Series, and the Bobby Richardson speared line drive off of McCovey, right? And to end it. And I mean, it was more like on the thinking back to the fond days with the Giants, not about wrapping it up elsewhere like that. I probably was less conscious of the breakup of the Giants when I was 12 at that time, because I wasn't a Giants fan particularly, other than knowing who those guys were. So it wouldn't have been something necessarily I even pushed to talk about, other than the awareness that, of course, he pitched for the Red Sox.
How much did the reaction that he had, I believe it was on the trip to Japan when he had that penicillin reaction, how much did that ultimately zap him, of his ability?
I don't know if that was a long-term thing. I mean, people get sick and bounce back, depending what they have, unless it's truly debilitating. And then sometimes only later do you say that's a pivotal moment. I mean, if you're injured, you're sick, a lot of times you're just thinking, what do I have to do to get back out there? Kind of thing. So, and I think that's true today too, right? Of course, they have better sports medicine. I had a conversation with Tommy John last summer, and I know so many people who know his name who don't even know baseball just because of the arm surgery, and he laughs about that, by the way, that he's known for that so much. But one thing he told me that I had never heard before, he was so determined to come back after the arm surgery. He was going to give it 2 years, and if he couldn't come back as himself the way he had been, he was going to start throwing the knuckleball and try to come back that way. I never heard that before, probably because he never had to do it. But I mean, obviously, when you're an athlete like that, you've been in the game, you'll do anything, right, to come back. Sometimes it's easier than not. Sometimes it'll pass. I mean, Tommy John pitched for how many more years after that surgery? Well, so again, then once in a while you'll read about a career-ending thing, with someone at a younger age. But I think Juan was was 39 when he retired, so he didn't really get cheated out of years. Let me look at this. 37 his last year, and that he only went 0-1. But so some guys are like that, and if they don't throw the knuckleball, they don't play until they're 45, I guess. Or I guess Tom Brady, right? Whatever that was.
Thank you.
Thanks, Jeff. The man with the dulcet tones, Mr. Taylor.
Well, first off, Lou, terrific presentation. I always enjoy your talks.
Thanks,
And,
Dan.
and I love the book. I mean, it's on my bookcase here. And I was a little surprised by your comment there because I thought I got it out of your book that Marichal learned got the leg kick instructions from his manager at Springfield, Andy Gilbert. Gandy's the one that kind of drilled that into him to increase his leg kick and drive that way. So maybe I got that wrong. Also, you guys talking about
Maybe I'm not
Alaska.
remembering right because it's a long time.
Happens to us all.
Yeah.
Also, you guys talking about Alaska comment at the Hall of Fame one year, I met Red Boucher and spent some great time with him. And
He was a
here's
good
guy
friend.
that has not received the credit for all his contributions to baseball that he really
He
deserved.
told me he wanted to be buried in his Gold Panthers uniform, but I never found out if he did.
And one of the things he told me at that time was that he was trying to get the Alaska Summer League made as the training ground for the U.S. national team. He wanted them added to the league and to make that league a training site for the national team, which I thought was a brilliant idea. But anyway, my question in the time you spent with Juan, I'm curious his attitude, his thoughts on his relationship at that time with the Giants organization. It always struck me as odd that there was a stretch where he was not embraced, and he actually ended up being the director of Latin scouting for the A's. And I'm curious if he talked about any of that with you.
You know, the kind of thing that's alien to his personality. You know, to harbor the bitterness and to, it might have felt very, I was going to use the wrong word, off-putting and all at the time. But it's not something that's stuck and lingered. It wasn't like he was bitter about the Giants, it came and went, and I don't know. I mean, we're all different that way. I mean, I suppose I hope I don't have a ton of enemies, but I have a few people that are still on my list, and I'm old, so I don't know if I've forgiven them all or not. So, based on what they've done, or shouldn't have done. So I think it's very much an individual thing, how you respond to stuff like that. And, with his personality, it's not something that you would expect him to harbor as it, but you're right. It seems like, but then Babe Ruth was like that, right? But he held a grudge, right? He wanted to manage the Yankees.
Yep.
And I always, as recently as something I read, I don't know, within the last month, I said, I wonder what it would have been like if Ruth had actually gone to Newark and managed the minor league team like they wanted to do. Would it have been a disaster? Would that have ended it? Or would it have worked? But he was too big in his head to do the minors. Whereas we were just talking about Hoyt Wilhelm, who got, of course, his start with the New York Giants out of the minors after a long minor league apprenticeship. And the moment he finished in the majors, when even he thought he could still go, and I always wish he made it past his 50th birthday. It was so close. It was only a couple of weeks. He immediately went to the minors, the Class A, and to manage. And then and that was fine with him. He said, if I sat around, they would forget me. If I left the game for, a year or something. So it's guys like that, willing to start at the bottom. And then, of course, he ended up not having the ambition to become a major league manager. It wasn't driven by it like a Ruth or some of these other guys who, knew what they wanted and how to go after it. And then there are some guys who just can't face the idea of the minors. Of course, these days, I think the baseball lifer is different. You read about guys now who were in the game for 50 years, and a lot of them spent an awful lot of time in the minors after they played on the sidelines, coaching, pitching coaches, minor league scouting directors. I mean, they spent tons of years. Who was one of the Phillies guys from 80? Maybe was it Del Unser who just retired?
Yeah.
I was reading about it, 50 years or something, but he wasn't with the Phillies. He might have been in the Phillies organization a lot, but those guys just wanted to be near the game and be part of the game. And they took what they could get.
Thank you.
Thanks for
Dan.
taking the time to do this tonight. I think we've all enjoyed it.
Oh,
Thank
yeah,
you.
well, thanks for having me. It's anytime.
Lou Hernandez, you're up. Lou, you want to unmute? Lou Hernandez. There you go.
Sorry, Gary.
Ed, Lou.
I thought you would be asking the question. Sorry.
ahead.
My question is about Marichal's personal life. Is he married? Does he have children? Things like that.
Yes, he's married, he had children. One of his daughters, in fact, she handles his email, but doesn't really forward them like she should. So, because Juan is not on the internet himself, or he wasn't. And I just forwarded something through her to him a week ago on behalf of somebody. And she married Jose Rio, the pitcher,
For the
and
Reds.
was Juan's son-in-law for a while, but they got divorced. So I don't know whether they speak or not. I don't know what their personal relationship really is, but yeah, he has kids, and that was ended up with a Major League Baseball player marrying into the family even. So, and then divorcing out of the family, I guess, too.
Thank you,
Thank
Lou.
you.
Mr. Norm, you're up.
Lou, thank you very much for your presentation. I really enjoyed your accounting of being in the Dominican Republic. My first opening day was 1964, and the matchup was Juan Marichal versus Warren Spahn.
Ah,
And I was so excited about that because of the 16th inning game from the previous year. Marichal pitched a complete game. It was an 8-4, we won. Only one of the runs was earned. Mays hit 2 home runs off of Spahn, and even Jim Ray Hart hit one off of Spahn. And that's one of my favorite Juan Marichal experiences. I'm wondering if you could share one of your favorite Juan Marichal stories with us.
well, actually, that visiting the Dominican with him was never to be topped. You know, the time spent there, the whole funny aspect of the pool house and the hotel, you know, everything from baseball. I really didn't do anything else while I was there. I think right before that or right after it, my brother took a vacation there and they went to the beach the whole time. I never saw a beach. I was totally immersed in baseball. And I don't think I'll ever forget going to the the Winter League game and the byplay with Moises Alou and the fans so that's probably my favorite Juan story right there. I didn't as I said, I had limited access to the National League when I was a kid, except for those big games, the nationally televised ones. I went to sleep listening to Kurt Gowdy do play-by-play of the Red Sox on the radio when I was a kid, before he was a national figure. But that had nothing to do with the National League. And in some ways, when you think back to that era and our age group, I mean, we're lucky we knew there was a National League, except for the All-Star game and I was just I just was working on the Hoyt Wilhelm thing, and it reminded me all over again about how that period in the early 60s that most people don't remember, where there were 2 All-Star games in a year for a few years in a row. And in fact, Stu Miller was mentioned earlier. He was pitching in one of those games that came up that I was doing some research on. But it was like, I got to see Willie Mays the All-Star game. And that was it a lot of times, a whole year. I mean, I knew who he was, but you have to think about it compared to now, where you got games on 24 hours a day practically, on how many different channels. And it was like, I would have been happy if the Braves had still been in Boston and we had 2 teams. I actually went to Boston University, and the home football field was the former Braves field. It was called Nickerson Stadium, and had been modified and much smaller and all. But so I used to think of the Braves, and boy, how cool it would have been if they were still there when I would go to a college football game as an undergraduate. But they were, Hank Aaron, he was over. I heard of him, but it was You know, really, when you're talking about that period, the early 60s and stuff, those guys were like, mythological might be strong, but you saw Mickey Mantle play all the time. The Red Sox were on TV. Oh, you could go and watch them play. But it wasn't that easy to even see guys like a Juan Marichal or Sandy Koufax at all.
You know, you hit on something that I never quite appreciated before. I always resented the A's moving to the Bay Area because I'm a Giants fan. Yet because the A's are here, I saw Mickey Mantle in uniform. I saw Al Kaline play and Harmon Killebrew. And you're right, I never would have seen them if they hadn't moved here.
Well, and heck, I'll tell you one thing. I lived in Alaska for 17 years. The Alaska Baseball League it was hard for me to see major league games, except for those guys who I would see come up in the majors 6 years later. I mean, I would fly to Seattle for a week in the summer. I was one of the only people that was still happy about the Kingdom being for baseball because I knew I wasn't going to get rained out when I bought tickets for 4 games in the same week. So that was the best part. And then they opened Safeco Field right when I left the area. I bought a brick, one of those things, you know, when they have those promotions. So I saw the brick once. You know, it says Alaska Freedmen's love baseball. That's what the brick says. I think it's in a bullpen. But I mean, I only ever saw it in person once because the next year I moved away from Seattle, you know, the Northwest. So now the closest to me is the Reds, 80 miles away if I want to go to the majors. But it's harder work. More TV, but less in person. I've been to a Louisville minor league game. My wife and I tend to go to the Indianapolis Indians once a year or so, besides the Reds.
Thanks, Norm.
Thank you. You've made a very enjoyable afternoon for me. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Afternoon, where are you?
I'm in California. I'm in the
You
Bay
must
Area.
be on the coast.
Yeah.
All right, or in Alaska. I was going to say those guys, it's only 4 o'clock for them.
Lou, I got 2 questions about you. You mentioned often about not harboring ill feelings. Both of these have to do with ill feelings. You know, I watched the Mays documentary, and Harvey has watched it countless times. But Orlando Cepeda definitely harbored ill feelings about Alvin Dark and the whole Latino
I
treatment.
was just going to say about the Latinos and
Right.
and
Did
race.
Marichal bring? No.
No, not really. Maybe in a tiny way, but I mean, not in a significant way. Nothing like Cepeda, which was well known.
Right.
Well before that documentary. He felt that way. And I had read that. I can't remember where I had read it, but that he felt very strongly. Of course, I guess I read Cepeda's book at one point, so that might have planted it. But
Right.
yeah, I know that he had those strong feelings. And it's also interesting. You wonder if there were guys who felt that way and never said anything at the time they were happening in a different kind of America where they thought they would be blackballed from the league or something.
Right.
Or, you know, like people would hold things against them. I mean, we can't stand in their shoes, but I mean, the way things have been more discussed about race and heritage in the last several years, you know, and the stuff you see, I mean, I'm sure there are a lot of people that have feelings like that who never said a word over the years. Didn't that come out with Tommy Harper and the Red Sox a couple of years ago too? Something like that he felt the organization had either held him back or discriminated against or something when he was coaching for them, maybe. That comes to mind now too. So there might have been cases like that where people had that internal grudge.
Right.
And then they didn't ever talk about it because they didn't either feel comfortable about it or
Right.
they thought it would harm their careers. But
And
yes, I just remember the Cepeda Al Dark thing. And Al Dark was a very religious man, right? And he seemed to be very blind to his effect on those people.
And my other comment had to do with what Dan Taylor said about Marichal, you know, working for the A's. And you mentioned again, you didn't harbor any ill feelings. Did the Giants creating that gorgeous statue of him, what was his reaction to that?
Loved it. I think those guys, it's funny because I'm working on something else right now, just started something in the last couple of days. And when I was in Chicago, the White Sox have been as good as any team at putting up bronze statues of people from their past. Maybe better than anybody else. I don't know who to compare it to. I was there on the day they revealed the Louis Aparicio, Nellie Fox combined statue. It's a double play. So how appropriate, right? And so I was just kind of writing about that and reviewing my notes and the stuff from talking to Louis Aparicio that day and how emotional he was about it, and the fact that they, decades like Louis, I just looked it up. I think today he's like 88, which stuns me too. That Aparicio could be 88 years old, but that and Nellie Fox, of course, died young. And at that time that they did the statue in 2006, Fox had already died of cancer and wasn't in the Hall of Fame yet. So this was like this dual recognition of someone for Luis, who's, I think Fox's wife was present too, but it was, you could tell how meaningful it was for him. And in the years I was in Chicago, Aparicio wasn't around much. I mean, some guys around, I saw Minnie Minoso. I could have seen him several days a week. I mean, he was at the ballpark all the time. Guys like that, Bill Skowron, before he passed away, he was around all the time, and he had much lesser connection to the White Sox than the Yankees, right? He's not remembered that way anyway. Louis Aparicio practically never. This was the one time that truly brought him out, pouring forth his thoughts. And so a statue like that, I think to any player, in where the fan base is, where they made their name, is such a good reminder of their youth and how they were treated when they were played, when they were popular, and the fact that all these years have gone by, which is the case in most of the time, even though the White Sox already have statues of Jim Thome and Paul Konerko. That hasn't been that long. It reminds them of good days. I mean, how can you not bask in that? I mean, I think they were in a statue building frenzy when I lived in Chicago. They put up the Ernie Banks statue when I was there. I mean, the White Sox haven't slowed down. Billy Pierce, when I was there, Billy Pierce was one of the nicest human beings who ever played the game, I think.
Yeah, I think I just saw that Gary Peters died.
Pardon me?
Gary Peters?
That's new to me.
No, I'm saying, I think he just passed away.
Oh, yeah, he did, but a little while ago. I
Yeah.
think it was a year or so ago. Yeah.
Oh, I thought it was this year or a couple of weeks.
No, I'd have to look it up, but I thought it was a little longer ago because I knew he had passed away.
It was a few days ago. It was recently.
Really?
Yes.
Why did I think he had already passed away? Because when I was
Last week.
There you go. Thanks, Dan.
Oh.
Thanks, Norm.
well, I was misinformed because I thought he had died a year ago or so. I was going to look for him to talk about Hoy Wilhelm because they used to fish together.
Does anybody else have a question who hasn't asked one? Hey, Lou, thank you so much for giving us your time tonight. And again,
Thanks for
gentlemen, even though the book's a little old, it's a great book and it's still available on Amazon. And if it interests you, you know where to get it. I will send out the link for that. But Lou, thank you so much for joining us. Can't thank you enough. And we look forward to your presentation on Point Wilhelm whenever that book comes out.
Probably next year we'll talk.
Wonderful.
Someone put a
If I
chat.
had a guess.
Excuse me, Gary, someone put on the chat note, a site where you can get the book.
Perfect.
Yes, and I had not heard of that. So it was that Lou who put that up? I can't remember. But it said that somebody had 20 of them.
Okay.
So
Yeah,
That's
www.adall.com.
that's more than I got, I'll tell you that.
That's a source that we use in the library world to pick up great used books. I mean, there are about 50,000 sources of used books there, so it's a great site.
Thank you, Jim. Jim, great to see you, by the way. We'll have Maury Bouchard next week, talking about Herman Franks. So until then, we'll see you guys. Have a great
Before
week.
you sign off,
Yes,
is that the Jim Gates I know from Cooperstown?
most certainly is.
Oh, oh. I hope
Retired
you're-
and living in Florida now.
I was just gonna say, ask if you were in Florida. I was just in the library a few weeks ago, and there was virtually nobody in the city of Cooperstown. Even the restaurants went on vacation.
Mhm.
I was in the Hall of Fame gallery, and the most I saw there that week I was there was 2 people. So
Yeah, you can have the whole museum to yourself on certain days.
you could. I forgot to ask Cassidy if she had heard from you. So I'm glad to see you, and I hope you're enjoying Florida.
So far, so good. I'm in t-shirts and shorts right now.
Now, living in southern Indiana after having lived in Alaska and Wyoming and upstate New York and New England, I might as well be.
Hey, Jim,
Uh,
12 degrees here on Long Island tomorrow.
Well,
It'll be
by
about
by the
80
way,
here.
I had a friend and his wife that lived in Fort Lauderdale, and due to a relocation of his job, he was going to Alaska. So I said, well, how does your wife feel about this? He said, I don't know. I'll ask her.
Ah,
And with that, let's all give it up for Lew Freedman.
thank you, guys.
Lou, have a great night, and
Thanks a lot,
we'll see
Gary.
everybody next week. If anybody wants to hang around, and I'll be here. Have a great night, everybody.
Oh,
Lou, thank-
Harvey, you listened to the same game that Les Kiter recreated. Marichal's debut, the 1-0 one-hitter against the Phillies, and McCovey